till a cowboy saw her sleeping alone, left at the depot on Christmas night. The night was cold in a way that made everything feel smaller and quieter. Snow had been falling since the afternoon, covering the roads, rooftops, and empty fields around the small town. By evening, the world looked soft and white, like a picture on a greeting card. Warm yellow lights glowed from the windows of houses. Inside, families were laughing, sharing food, and opening gifts. The sound of Christmas songs drifted gently through the air. But at the edge of town, near the old railway tracks, the train depot stood almost forgotten. The depot was not a large building. It was made of old wood that had faded over the years. The paint had chipped away in places, and the sign above the door hung slightly crooked. A single light flickered near the entrance, fighting against the dark sky and heavy snow. Most people had already gone home. The last train had left hours ago, its whistle fading into the distance. Inside the depot, the air was cold and still. The benches were hard and worn smooth by years of travelers waiting for trains that came and went. A clock hung on the wall, ticking loudly in the silence. Each tick seemed to echo more than usual, as if the building itself felt lonely. On one of the benches near the far corner, a small figure lay curled up. She was a young girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old. Her knees were pulled tightly to her chest. She wore a thin blue coat that was too light for the winter night. Snowflakes had melted in her hair earlier, leaving it slightly damp. Her shoes were old and the soles were worn down. Beside her bench rested a small brown suitcase. It looked heavy for someone her size. The corners were scratched, and one of the metal locks was slightly bent. Tied to the handle was a paper tag with a name written in careful handwriting. The ink had smudged from the cold and moisture, but the name could still be read if someone looked closely. Her name was Emily. Emily had arrived at the depot earlier that evening. When the sky was still a soft gray, and the snow had just begun to fall, she had been standing near the ticket window. Her small hands were wrapped around the handle of her suitcase. Her eyes had searched the platform again and again. She had been told to wait. "Stay right here," a gentle voice had said. "I'll be back soon." So she waited. At first she stood. She watched every person who walked by. Each time the door opened, her heart jumped with hope. She thought the next face would be the one she was looking for, but each time it was someone else. A man carrying gifts, a woman rushing to catch the train, a young couple laughing together. The station master had noticed her once. He was an older man with round glasses and a thick scarf wrapped around his neck. He had asked her if someone was coming for her. Emily had nodded quickly and said yes. Her voice had been small but sure. She truly believed it. The man had smiled kindly and returned to his office. It was Christmas Eve, after all. He had his own family waiting at home. As the sky grew darker, the depot grew emptier. The last train arrived with a loud whistle and clouds of steam. For a few busy minutes, the platform filled with noise. People stepped down, hugging loved ones who had come to meet them. Laughter echoed under the roof. Boots crunched in the snow. Doors opened and closed. Emily stood up from the bench, her eyes wide and hopeful. But when the train finally pulled away again, the platform became quiet once more. No one had come for her. She told herself not to worry. Maybe there was a delay. Maybe something small had happened. Grown-ups always had reasons. She believed that. She sat back down on the bench and pulled her coat tighter around her body. The clock on the wall continued ticking. 7 o'clock passed. Then 8. Outside, the wind grew stronger. It pushed snow against the windows in soft waves. The flickering light above the door buzzed quietly. Emily's stomach growled, but she ignored it. She didn't want to open her suitcase. She had been told not to make a mess. She had been told to stay neat and quiet. So she stayed exactly where she was, her back straight at first, her hands folded in her lap. Every time she heard a sound, she looked up quickly. Footsteps. A door closing. Each sound made her heart beat faster, but none of them were the sound she was waiting for. At 9 o'clock, the station master stepped out of his office again. He looked surprised to see her still there. The depot was almost empty now. Only one lantern remained lit. "Is someone still coming for you?" he asked gently. Emily nodded again. Her voice shook a little this time when she said yes. The man hesitated. He looked toward the window at the heavy snowfall. He looked back at the little girl with the small suitcase and the hopeful eyes. "Well," he said softly, "I'll be locking up soon." Emily swallowed and nodded. "She'll be here," she whispered. The station master sighed quietly. He wasn't unkind. He simply didn't understand the situation. He believed that no one would leave a child alone for long, especially not on Christmas. He returned to his office and finished his work. After a while, he turned off most of the lights. Only one small lamp remained on near the entrance. "Don't stay out in the cold," he called gently before stepping outside to lock up the ticket window. "I'm sure they'll come." Emily watched him leave. She listened to his footsteps fade into the snow. Now the depot felt even bigger and emptier. Wind howled softly outside. Snow continued to fall, covering the tracks and platform in thick white layers. The world beyond the windows looked blurry and distant. Emily slid further down the bench. The wood felt hard beneath her. She tried to stay awake. She told herself she had to keep watching the door, but her eyelids felt heavy. She thought about warm places. She thought about lights and music. She thought about the promise that had been spoken earlier that day. "I'll be back soon." Soon felt like a very long time. Her small fingers loosened their grip on the suitcase handle. Slowly, she pulled her feet up onto the bench and curled into herself for warmth. Her cheek rested against the cold wooden surface. She listened to the ticking clock. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt louder than the last. Outside, somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. Their sound floated gently through the snowy night. The bells carried joy and celebration, calling people together. Emily heard them faintly. For a moment her lips curved into a soft smile. She imagined walking toward that sound. She imagined a door opening and someone calling her name. But the door of the depot remained closed. The wind pushed against it again. Her breathing slowed as sleep began to take over. Even though the air was cold, exhaustion wrapped around her like a blanket. She had been brave all evening. She had waited without complaining. She had believed. Now her body simply needed rest. Her head tilted slightly to the side. A loose strand of hair fell across her face. The thin coat did little to protect her from the cold air drifting through the cracks in the old building. The clock continued its steady ticking. Outside, snow covered any footprints that had once been on the platform. It erased signs of who had come and gone. It made everything look untouched and still. Inside, under the dim flickering light, Emily slept alone. The town continued celebrating. Laughter filled warm kitchens. Gifts were opened. Stories were shared by glowing fireplaces. No one knew about the small girl at the depot bench. No one knew she was still waiting. The night grew deeper. The light above the door flickered again, then steadied. And in that quiet, frozen corner of town, a child who trusted a promise drifted into a restless sleep, unaware that this Christmas night was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. The snow kept falling long after the church bells stopped ringing. The town slowly grew quieter as the night became deeper. Most people were inside their homes, sitting close to warmth, sharing stories and food. The roads were nearly empty. Only the sound of wind moving across the open land could be heard. Far outside town, beyond the last row of houses and past the frozen fields, a lone rider guided his horse along a narrow path covered in snow. His name was Daniel Harper. Daniel was known in the town as a hard-working rancher. He lived alone on a wide piece of land that had belonged to his family for many years. His ranch sat between low hills and open sky. In summer, the grass stretched green and endless. In winter, it turned into a quiet white world that felt far away from everything else. That evening, Daniel had stayed longer than planned. A section of his fence had broken earlier in the day, and he did not want his horses wandering off during the storm. He had spent hours fixing the wooden posts, his hands stiff from the cold, his breath turning into white clouds in the air. Christmas had never been a special day for him in recent years. Long ago it had been different. There had been laughter in his home, warm meals and bright lights, but time had changed things. Now he preferred to treat the day like any other. Work kept his mind steady. Silence felt easier than memories. As he rode toward town that night, he told himself he only needed to make one quick stop at the depot. Earlier that week, he had been expecting a shipment of supplies. The train was supposed to bring it that afternoon, but the weather had delayed many things. He wanted to check if the crates had arrived before the snow became worse. His horse moved carefully along the icy ground. The wind brushed against Daniel's coat and hat, but he was used to it. Winter did not frighten him. He had lived through many storms. When he finally reached the edge of town, he noticed how still everything felt. Most windows were dark now. Only a few houses still showed light behind curtains. The snow had piled up along the sidewalks and doorsteps. The depot stood at the far end of the road, near the silent tracks. From a distance, it looked almost forgotten. A single dim light flickered near the entrance. Daniel slowed his horse. He had expected the place to be completely dark and locked, but that faint light caught his attention. He guided his horse closer and tied the reins to the wooden post near the platform. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped down. The cold air bit at his face, but he barely noticed. For a moment, he stood there listening. The wind whistled softly around the building. The loose edge of a metal sign tapped gently against the wall. Everything else was quiet. He walked toward the door and pushed it open. It creaked as it moved. Inside, the air felt colder than he expected. The depot was nearly empty. Most of the lamps had been turned off. Only one small light near the entrance remained on, casting long shadows across the floor. He did not see any crates or shipments near the wall. The benches were empty at first glance. The ticket window was closed. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the sound sharp in the stillness. He took a few steps forward. That was when he noticed something unusual. At the far end of the bench closest to the wall, near the corner where the shadows were deeper, he saw what looked like a small shape. At first he thought it might be a pile of coats left behind by someone in a hurry, but then he saw it clearly. A small pair of shoes. The shoes were worn and dusted lightly with snow that had melted and dried. They were too small to belong to any adult. His eyes moved upward slowly. There, curled tightly on the wooden bench, was a young girl. She was sleeping. Her knees were pulled close to her chest. One arm rested protectively over a small brown suitcase beside her. Her face looked pale in the dim light. Strands of hair covered part of her cheek. Her thin coat did little to shield her from the cold air inside the depot. For a few seconds, Daniel did not move at all. He was not a man easily surprised. Life on a ranch taught him to stay calm and steady, but this was not something he had expected to see on Christmas night. A child. Alone. He glanced toward the door, half expecting someone to rush in and explain. Maybe a parent was outside. Maybe someone had stepped away for a moment, but the door remained closed. The wind continued to hum softly outside. Daniel's boots echoed quietly as he walked closer. The girl did not wake up at first. Her breathing was slow and uneven, as if she had been trying hard to stay awake before finally giving in to sleep. One of her hands was red from the cold. Daniel looked around again. The depot was nearly empty. The station master's office was dark. No voices could be heard. No footsteps approached. He removed his gloves slowly and rubbed his hands together to warm them. His eyes returned to the child. There was something about the way she slept that made his chest feel tight. She was not stretched out comfortably. She was curled tightly, like someone trying to protect herself from the cold and from the world. Daniel cleared his throat softly, unsure of what to say. He had dealt with cattle, storms, broken fences, and long, lonely nights, but he had not dealt with this. He stepped closer and gently tapped the wooden bench near her feet. The girl stirred slightly, but did not wake fully. Her hand tightened around the handle of the suitcase. Daniel crouched down so he would not appear tall or frightening when she opened her eyes. He spoke in a low, careful voice. "Hey there," he said softly. The girl's eyes fluttered open. For a moment she looked confused. She blinked at the dim light above. Then she saw him. Her eyes widened. Daniel quickly lifted one hand in a calm gesture. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're safe." She pushed herself up slightly, still holding onto her suitcase. Her voice was small and sleepy. "I'm waiting," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "Waiting for someone?" She nodded back. The simple way she said it made it clear she believed what she was saying. Daniel glanced toward the clock. It was very late. "Do you know what time it is?" he asked softly. Shook her head. He hesitated. He did not want to scare her. He did not want to say the wrong thing. Have you been here long?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Since before it got dark," she answered quietly. Daniel felt the weight of those words settle in the cold room. He stood up and walked to the door, opening it slightly to look outside. Snow covered the platform completely. Any footprints from earlier had vanished beneath fresh layers. The night stretched wide and empty in every direction. No one was coming down that road. He closed the door gently and leaned against it for a second. This was not his responsibility, he told himself. Someone else would handle it. The sheriff. The station master. There were rules for these things. But when he turned back and saw the girl sitting there on the hard bench, her shoulders small beneath that thin coat, those thoughts did not feel strong enough. She looked at him with tired but trusting eyes. "Are you from the train?" she asked. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No." "She said she'd come back," she whispered. Daniel did not ask who she meant. He did not need to. The wind pushed against the building again, rattling the windows slightly. He walked back toward her and removed his thick wool scarf. Without saying much, he gently placed it around her shoulders. She looked surprised. "It's cold in here," he said simply. She nodded. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked. Snow fell. And Daniel Harper, a man who had built his life on staying distant and steady, stood in the middle of the empty depot on Christmas night, realizing that this quiet, unexpected moment was about to change everything. The wind pressed harder against the walls of the depot, making the windows tremble slightly. Snow kept falling outside, thick and steady, covering the tracks until they almost disappeared from sight. Inside, the air felt heavy with silence. Emily adjusted the scarf around her shoulders. It was much warmer than her thin coat. She held it close, as if afraid it might be taken away. Daniel stood a few steps away, unsure of what to say next. He was not used to long conversations, especially not with children. He spent most of his days speaking to ranch hands, store owners, or sometimes no one at all. Words had never been his strength, but this moment required something more than silence. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl looked at him carefully before answering. "Emily." Her voice was soft but clear. "Emily," he repeated, as if making sure he would remember it. She glanced toward the door again. "She'll come," she said quietly, almost as if she was reminding herself. Daniel did not respond right away. He walked toward the window and looked outside once more. Snow covered everything. The platform, the road, the fields beyond town, all hidden under white. No lanterns in the distance, no shadows moving, no signs of anyone walking toward the depot. He had lived long enough to understand when waiting would change nothing. When he turned back, Emily was watching him. There was no fear in her eyes, only tired hope. "Did someone bring you here?" he asked. She nodded. "Mama." The word hung in the cold air between them. "She said to wait," Emily continued. "She said she had to fix something and she'd be back before the train came." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "And that was earlier today?" Emily nodded again. "Before the snow got big?" It was close to midnight now. He walked slowly toward the bench and sat down on the far end, leaving space between them so she would not feel crowded. "Emily," he said carefully, "it's very late. The trains are done for the night." But she said, "I know," he said softly. "I know she did." The wind howled louder for a moment, as if reminding them how cold the world outside had become. Emily lowered her eyes. She rubbed her hands together for warmth. Even with the scarf, her fingers were pale. Daniel noticed the small suitcase again. "Is that all your things?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Do you have family in town?" She shook her head. "Anywhere nearby?" Another shake. Daniel leaned back slightly and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He had hoped there would be an easy answer. A neighbor. Someone who could explain this. But there was only silence. Emily looked up at him again. "Are you the station man?" she asked. He gave a small, almost shy smile. "No, I'm just someone passing through." His coat was thick and dusted with snow. His boots were worn from long days of work. His hat rested low on his head. "You have a horse?" she asked suddenly. He seemed surprised by the question. "Yes." "A real one?" "Yes, a real one." "What's its name?" "Rusty." A faint smile appeared on her face. "Ah, that's a funny name." It had been a long time since anyone had smiled at him like that. Small, simple, honest. The moment passed quickly, though. Emily's eyes moved back to the door. "What if she comes and I'm not here?" she whispered. That question hit harder than the wind outside. Daniel chose his words carefully. "If she comes," he said, "we'll make sure she knows where you are." Emily frowned slightly, but she said to stay right here. Daniel understood that promise was the only thing she was holding on to. Telling her to leave would feel like breaking it. He stood up and walked toward the door again. He opened it fully this time and stepped onto the platform. Snow fell against his coat and hat. The cold air rushed in behind him. He looked down the road, then toward the tracks. Nothing. The world looked empty and endless. He stepped back inside and closed the door firmly. "Emily," he said gently, kneeling so they were eye level. "It's not safe to stay here tonight." She looked at him with wide eyes. "Why?" "And there's no one else here." She hesitated. "I can wait," she insisted softly. Daniel noticed how her voice trembled now. She was trying to be brave, trying to follow instructions, trying to believe everything would be fine, but her small body was shaking from the cold. He removed his gloves and gently touched her hand. It felt icy. "You've already waited a long time," he said quietly. "You did exactly what you were told." That was very brave. Her lower lip trembled slightly. "I don't want to get in trouble." "You won't," he assured her. "I promise." She studied his face as if searching for something. "Maybe truth. Maybe safety." "Where would I go?" she asked. Daniel took a slow breath. He had not planned this. He had come to check a shipment and return home alone, just as he had done every winter night for years. But the thought of leaving her here was not something he could accept. "You can come with me," he said at last. She blinked. "With you? I have a ranch outside town. It's warm there. You can sleep in a real bed tonight." She looked uncertain. "Just for tonight?" "Just for tonight," he said gently. "Tomorrow, we'll talk to the sheriff. We'll figure things out." Emily looked at the door again, then at the clock. "What if she comes after we leave?" she whispered. Daniel stood up and walked to the ticket counter. A piece of paper and a pencil left behind. Slowly, in careful handwriting, he wrote a note. He returned and showed it to her. It said, "Emily is safe. Please contact Sheriff's Office." He folded the paper and placed it clearly on the bench where she had been sitting. "If she comes," he explained, "she'll see this. She'll know you're safe." Emily stared at the note for a long moment. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Finally, she nodded, just a small movement, but enough. Daniel picked up her suitcase. It was heavier than he expected for such a small bag. "Ready?" he asked. She slid off the bench slowly. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long. She wobbled slightly, and he instinctively reached out to steady her. Her hand felt tiny in his large, rough one. They walked toward the door together. When Daniel opened it, the cold air rushed over them again. Emily gasped softly at how much snow had gathered. The platform looked completely different from earlier. "It's like the world changed," she whispered. "In winter it does that," Daniel replied. He helped her step carefully through the snow toward where Rusty was tied. The horse shifted slightly but remained calm. Emily's eyes widened. "He's big. He's gentle," Daniel assured her. He lifted her carefully and placed her in front of him on the saddle. Then he climbed up behind her, holding the reins firmly. "Hold on to the saddle," he said. She gripped it tightly. As Rusty began walking, the depot grew smaller behind them. The note remained on the bench inside, waiting for someone who might or might not return. Emily looked back one last time. Daniel noticed, but did not say anything. The road stretched ahead, quiet and white under the moonlight. Snow continued falling, but more softly now. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves pressing into snow. After a few minutes, Emily asked softly, "Is your ranch far?" "Not too far," he answered. "About 15 minutes." She leaned back slightly against him. He could feel how tired she was. "Will Rusty get cold?" she asked sleepily. "He's used to winter," Daniel said. She nodded. The warmth from his coat and the slow, steady movement of the horse began to make her eyes heavy again. Daniel looked down at the small figure in front of him. Just hours ago, his night had been ordinary. Quiet, predictable. Now everything felt different. The ranch house lights appeared faintly in the distance. "You're almost warm," he murmured softly, though he wasn't sure if she was awake enough to hear. Emily's voice came barely above a whisper. "Thank you for finding me." He had not been looking for anything that night. But as the ranch grew closer and the depot faded into the snowy distance, he realized something simple and powerful. Sometimes you don't plan to change a life. Sometimes you just open a door, and everything after that changes on its own. The ranch house stood quiet under a sky full of falling snow. Warm light glowed from the windows, shining softly across the white ground. Smoke rose slowly from the chimney, moving gently with the wind. It had been a long time since that house had welcomed anyone new. When Daniel helped Emily down from the horse, she looked around with wide eyes. The ranch seemed large to her. The barn stood to one side, the fence stretched across the fields, and beyond that were low hills covered in snow. "It's big," she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod. "Feels bigger in winter." He led her toward the front door. The wooden steps creaked under their boots. When he opened the door, warm air rushed out to meet them. The inside of the house smelled faintly of wood smoke and fresh bread he had baked earlier that week. Emily stepped inside slowly, as if afraid the warmth might disappear. The living room was simple. A small tree stood in the corner, decorated with only a few lights and handmade wooden ornaments. Daniel had put it up out of habit more than celebration. He had not planned to sit beside it that night. Emily stared at the tree. "You have Christmas lights," she said softly. Daniel looked at it, almost surprised. "I guess I do." He closed the door behind them and hung his coat. Then he knelt down to remove Emily's snow-covered shoes. "Your feet must be freezing," he said gently. She nodded, but tried not to complain. He noticed how she tried to be quiet and careful, as if she did not want to cause trouble. After placing her shoes near the fire to dry, he guided her toward the kitchen table. "Sit here," he said. "I'll make something warm." Emily sat down, still holding on to her small suitcase. "You can put that down," Daniel said softly. She hesitated before placing it beside her chair. He heated some soup on the stove and poured it into a bowl. He added a slice of bread on the side. When he set it in front of her, steam rose into the air. She stared at it for a moment. "Go on," he encouraged. She picked up the spoon carefully and took a small bite. Her shoulders relaxed almost instantly. Warmth spread through her. Daniel sat across from her with a cup of coffee in his hands. He watched as she ate slowly at first, then with more hunger. "You can have more if you need," he said. She nodded quietly. After she finished, her eyes looked heavy again. The long day and cold night had taken their toll. "I'll show you a room," Daniel said. He led her down a short hallway. At the end was a small bedroom that had not been used in years. He had kept it clean but simple. A bed stood against the wall with fresh blankets folded at the foot. Emily stepped inside and looked around. "It's for me?" she asked. "For tonight," Daniel replied gently. She walked toward the bed and touched the blanket, as if making sure it was real. Daniel left the room for a moment and returned with an extra quilt. He placed it on the bed to make it warmer. "If you need anything," he said, "my room is just across the hall." Before leaving, he paused at the door. "You're safe here," he added quietly. Emily looked up at him. "You promise?" He met her eyes. "I promise." He turned off the light, leaving a small lamp glowing in the corner so the room would not feel too dark. That night, Daniel did not sleep easily. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house felt different. Not louder, not busier, just different. There was a presence now, a small life resting in the next room. He kept thinking about the depot, about the note he left, about the possibility of someone coming back. Morning arrived slowly. Sunlight reflected brightly off the snow outside, filling the house with soft light. Daniel woke early, as he always did. He stepped quietly into the hallway and listened. He could hear small movements from the bedroom. When he knocked gently and opened the door, he saw Emily sitting up in bed, looking uncertain but rested. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied softly. He noticed she had folded the blanket neatly, as if she wanted to show she respected the space. After breakfast, Daniel put on his coat. We need to go into town," he explained. "Talk to the sheriff." Emily's hands tightened around her cup. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. "No," he answered quickly. "You did nothing wrong." She nodded but remained quiet. They rode back into town together. The snow had slowed and the sky looked clearer. The depot stood just as it had the night before, calm and silent. Daniel checked inside briefly. The note was still there. No one had come. He led Emily to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Collins was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a serious expression. He listened carefully as Daniel explained everything. The sheriff looked at Emily gently. "Do you remember your full name, sweetheart?" she told him. "Do you know where you were going?" She shook her head. The sheriff wrote down notes and made phone calls. Hours passed as they waited in the small office. Emily sat quietly beside Daniel. Finally, the sheriff returned with a slow shake of his head. "There's no report," he said. "No one has called about a missing child." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "We'll keep looking," the sheriff added. "But for now, she can't stay alone." He looked at Daniel. "You found her. Are you willing to keep her for a few days until we sort this out?" Daniel hesitated. A few days sounded simple, temporary, manageable. But he knew nothing about raising a child. His life was built around early mornings, long work hours, and quiet evenings. Emily looked up at him, waiting. He remembered the cold bench, the trembling hands, the way she had said thank you. "Yes," he said at last. "She can stay with me. Just temporary guardianship for now." On the ride back to the ranch, Emily seemed thoughtful. "Do I have to leave soon?" she asked quietly. Daniel answered honestly, "I don't know yet." That truth stayed with him over the next few days. Emily slowly began to explore the ranch. She followed him to the barn, watching carefully as he fed the horses. She asked small questions about everything. Why does Rusty have that white spot? Why do cows stay close together? Do horses get lonely? Daniel found himself answering more than he had spoken in years. The house began to feel less empty. Small shoes rested near the door. A soft voice echoed through the hallway. One evening he heard her humming quietly while drawing at the kitchen table. But with each passing day, a thought weighed heavily on him. What would happen if someone came forward? What if she had to leave? One afternoon, the sheriff visited the ranch. "No new leads," he admitted. "We've contacted nearby towns. Nothing yet." Emily was inside reading an old book Daniel had found. The sheriff lowered his voice. "If no family is found, she'll have to enter the system." Daniel understood what that meant. It would be another change, another unknown place for her. That night, after Emily went to bed, Daniel sat alone by the small Christmas tree. He stared at the lights. He had spent years protecting himself from loss, keeping his heart guarded, letting no one close enough to leave a mark. But Emily had already left one. He thought about her smile when she saw Rusty, the way she folded her blanket neatly, the trust in her eyes when she asked for a promise. He realized something simple but powerful. This was no longer just about helping for a few days. It was about choosing whether to open his life again. And that was the hardest decision he had faced in a very long time.